Silverware paused mid-air as Bumpy Johnson spoke once. An interruption at Frank Costello's private dinner turned dangerous, then quiet, too quiet, hinting that tonight wouldn't end the way anyone planned. The room was built for secrecy, low light, heavy drapes, the kind of quiet that cost money. Silverware rested between courses. Conversations stayed narrow, careful. Frank Costello liked it that way, nothing accidental, nothing unscheduled. Even the waiters moved like they'd been warned. Then the door opened, not fast, not loud, just enough. Bumpy Johnson stepped inside as if he'd been expected late, not uninvited. His coat stayed on, his hands stayed empty. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. The room found him first. A chair scraped, then stopped halfway. Someone inhaled and forgot to finish. This wasn't forced. This was recognition. Bumpy didn't apologize for the interruption. He didn't announce himself. He took 2 steps forward and paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for everyone except him. Costello looked up slowly, not startled, curious. The way a man looks when something rare interrupts a routine he thought was untouchable. "Frank," Bumpy said. One word. Calm. Even. The name landed heavier than an insult. This wasn't Harlem. This wasn't a sidewalk or a back room where voices rose and hands twitched. This was Costello's space, controlled, curated, protected. And yet the balance shifted the moment Bumpy spoke. No one reached for anything. No one stood. They were waiting to see which rules still applied. Bumpy took another step, stopping just short of the table, close enough to be part of the dinner, far enough to remind everyone he hadn't asked. "I won't take long," he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a decision. Costello studied him, measuring posture, tone, the absence of threat. That absence was the loudest thing in the room. Men who came to challenge didn't arrive like this. Men who begged didn't arrive at all. Bumpy's eyes moved, finally, briefly, not searching for enemies, acknowledging witnesses. Every man present understood he was being included in something he'd repeat later, carefully. "This could have waited," Costello said. Bumpy smiled, just enough to show it wasn't friendly. "Could have," he agreed. "Didn't." Another pause. Longer this time. Outside the room, the restaurant lived its normal life. Laughter, plates, music. Inside, time slowed. Plans began to loosen their grip. Whatever was scheduled next started to feel optional. Bumpy leaned in slightly, lowering his voice without whispering. "Private dinners are for comfort," he said. "I came because comfort was about to get expensive. No threat, no explanation, just a sense that something had already crossed a line and that the consequences were patient." Costello didn't respond right away. He looked at the table, at the men around it, at the untouched food, then back at Bumpy. The interruption was complete. Nothing had happened yet, but the evening was no longer his. No one needed an introduction. Bumpy Johnson stood there, and the room adjusted. A man near the wall shifted his weight, then decided against it. Another reached for his glass, stopped, and left his hand where it was. Small movements corrected. Instincts reined in. The kind of discipline that only appears when reputations arrive before the man does. Bumpy didn't claim a seat. He didn't ask for one. Standing kept the balance tilted, everyone else anchored, him uncommitted. It reminded them this wasn't a meeting. It was a moment. Costello watched the room respond before he responded himself. That mattered. Power wasn't just what a man said. It was what happened around him when he said nothing at all. Bumpy's voice stayed low, not secretive, considerate. "I won't embarrass you," he said, glancing once at the table. "Not my way." A few men exhaled. They didn't realize they'd been holding their breath. Embarrassment was currency in rooms like this. So was restraint. Bumpy understood both. He wasn't here to humiliate Costello in front of his own people. That would have been easy. Easy things didn't last. "I'm here because something's drifting," Bumpy continued. "And drift turns into damage if no one corrects it. No accusations, no names, just direction." Costello leaned back slightly, testing the space Bumpy allowed him. It was there. That was the signal. This wasn't an ambush. This was a recalibration. "You're a long way from home," Costello said. Bumpy nodded once. "So is the problem?" That line moved through the room without sound. Men who'd planned futures in careful increments suddenly felt those plans wobble. Harlem had edges. Those edges were speaking now, calmly, in a borrowed room. Bumpy's eyes met Costello's, steady, not challenging, expectant. "Every man here eats because the balance holds," Bumpy said. "When it doesn't, nobody tastes the food. They just chew." A pause. The waiters froze near the door, uncertain whether they were still allowed to exist. No one dismissed them. No one needed to. Authority had already settled. Costello glanced at his plate, then pushed it aside slightly. The gesture was small. It carried weight. "Go on," he said. Not permission. Acknowledgement. Bumpy inclined his head. Not thanks. Recognition. The room had chosen to listen. Not because it was afraid. Because it understood. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, a hierarchy rearranged itself without sound. No threats had been made. No lines drawn. But everyone now knew where Bumpy stood. And more importantly, where they didn't. Frank Costello had built his life on reading rooms. Not just faces, timing, temperature, the invisible math of consequence. He knew when to push, when to pause, and when to let another man speak himself into a corner. This time, the corner hadn't appeared. That bothered him. Bumpy Johnson stood where he was, unbothered by the weight of attention. No pacing, no gesturing. He let the silence do the work, the way experienced men always did. Costello recognized that discipline immediately. It was familiar, dangerous in its own way. Costello folded his hands together, elbows resting lightly on the table. The dinner, for all practical purposes, was over. Everyone understood that without being told. "You didn't come for a courtesy call," Costello said. Bumpy shook his head once. "Courtesy's what comes after." A few men exchanged glances. They knew better than to interrupt. This wasn't a negotiation yet. It was an assessment. Costello's mind moved quickly. Pride was a luxury. So was violence. Both had costs, and tonight those costs felt unusually high. Not because Bumpy threatened them, but because he didn't. Costello studied the man's posture. Open, grounded, no tension in the shoulders. That told him everything. This wasn't emotional. This was settled. "You could have sent word," Costello said. Bumpy's eyes stayed on him. "I did." Costello's jaw tightened slightly. Whatever message had been ignored, dismissed, or delayed, it had now arrived in person. That was never good. Messages that walked and carried patience, not urgency. Patience lasted longer. Around the table, men shifted their attention subtly toward Costello, not to pressure him, but to see which version of him would answer. The one who asserted dominance, or the one who protected longevity. Costello tapped a finger against the table once, stopped himself. Another correction. He looked at the door, then back at Bumpy. "You cancel plans when you're unsure," Bumpy said quietly. "That's not weakness. That's survival." The line landed clean. No insult, no praise, just truth delivered without heat. Costello exhaled through his nose. A small sound, almost a laugh, but not quite. He leaned back and waved a hand toward the untouched plates. "Clear it," he said. The waiters didn't hesitate this time. Chairs scraped softly as the table emptied. Men adjusted their seats, settling in for something longer than a meal. Costello's schedule, the one written in ink, was already dissolving. He turned fully toward Bumpy. "You've got my attention," he said. "Talk, not a challenge, a decision." Bumpy nodded once, acknowledging the shift, not victory. Alignment. The door closed behind the last waiter. The outside world faded. What remained was a room of powerful men, recalculating their futures in real time. Costello listened now, not because he was forced to, because he understood what happens when you don't. Time changed shape. There were no clocks anyone trusted anymore. The room settled into something slower, heavier, not tense, focused. Bumpy spoke without hurry, as if the night had already agreed to belong to him. He didn't lecture. He placed ideas carefully, like pieces on a table no one realized they'd agreed to play on. "This isn't about territory," Bumpy said. "It's about pressure." He paused after the word, letting it breathe. Pressure was a language every man in the room understood. Pressure bent men. Pressure exposed them. Pressure, when ignored, broke things that didn't need breaking. Costello listened with his chin slightly lowered, eyes up. He didn't interrupt. Every few minutes, he shifted in his chair, not restless, just adjusting to the weight of what was being said. Bumpy spoke of lines that didn't need to be crossed to be felt, of neighborhoods that didn't shout but remembered, of people who paid quietly and expected protection in return, not chaos, not headlines. They don't care who wins, Bumpy said. They care who keeps the lights on. A murmur almost formed, then died before it reached the air. The men around the table began to understand this wasn't a demand. It was a reminder of responsibilities that outlived any single deal. Harlem wasn't being defended with threats. It was being framed as essential infrastructure. Minutes turned into an hour, then another. Glasses were refilled without ceremony. No one stood. No one checked the door. Every plan outside that room faded into irrelevance. Costello's calendar was gone now. There was only the conversation. Bumpy's pauses did more work than his sentences. When he stopped speaking, the silence pressed inward, forcing the men to consider what hadn't been said yet. That was where the real leverage lived. At one point, Costello leaned forward. "You're asking for trust," he said. Bumpy didn't answer immediately. He looked at Costello, measured him, then shook his head slowly. "I'm reminding you where it already exists." That landed harder than any accusation. Costello leaned back again, hands open now, palms visible. Not surrender, openness. He was listening with his whole body. 4 hours passed that way, one measured exchange after another. No raised voices, no ultimatums, just two men who understood that violence was easy, and therefore rarely the smartest move. Near the end, Bumpy stood straighter, signaling something without announcing it. "This conversation doesn't repeat," he said. "It echoes." Costello nodded once. "I hear it." When Bumpy finally stopped speaking, no one rushed to fill the space. The silence felt earned, shared, respectful. The room knew something had shifted, not dramatically, permanently, and everyone present would carry it with them, whether they wanted to or not. The moment arrived quietly. No door slammed, no voice rose, but everyone in the room felt it. The invisible fork in the road, where men usually reached for certainty through force. It hovered there, waiting to be chosen. Bumpy Johnson didn't reach for it. He remained standing, hands still, posture unchanged, not defiant, disciplined. Violence had been invited by the situation itself, and his refusal carried more authority than acceptance ever could. "This could have gone another way," Costello said, almost to himself. Bumpy nodded. "It still can," he replied. "That's the point." No threats followed. None were needed. The danger was understood, acknowledged, then set aside. That restraint drew a clearer line than blood ever would. Around the table, men recalibrated again. Some had come expecting spectacle. Others had prepared for damage control. Instead, they witnessed something rarer, a decision to preserve the future rather than dominate the present. Costello studied Bumpy's face, searching for ego. He found none. What he saw instead was commitment to people who weren't in the room, to streets that didn't get invitations to dinners like this. "You're protecting something," Costello said. Bumpy's eyes hardened just slightly. "I always am." That was the closest he came to a warning. Costello nodded slowly. He understood now. This wasn't about leverage tonight. It was about precedent, about what would be remembered the next time pressure appeared. And it would. He pushed his chair back and stood. The men followed his lead without being told. Hierarchy reasserted itself, but altered. "Plans are canceled," Costello said. For the rest of the night, no one questioned it. Bumpy adjusted his coat, preparing to leave. He hadn't stayed long by the clock, but long enough by consequence. He looked once more around the room, making sure the message had found every corner. It had. At the door, he paused, not for drama, for clarity. "Respect doesn't announce itself," he said. "It shows up." Then he was gone. The door closed softly behind him, sealing in the lesson. No bodies, no broken glass, just a room full of powerful men understanding exactly how close they'd come to choosing wrong, and why they were grateful they hadn't. The strongest move had been the one not taken.